Hello everyone, welcome back to another story. Before we get started, comment below where you from and what time you are watching. And if you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. The Boeing 737 touched down at LaGuardia Airport at precisely 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Flight 72 from Chicago had been unremarkable in every way. A Tuesday night red-eye filled with business travelers, exhausted tourists, and a handful of students returning from spring break. The landing was smooth, the kind that barely registered as a bump, and Captain Rebecca Morrison allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction as she guided the aircraft toward Gate C-23. In the cabin, flight attendant Sarah Chen began her final walkthrough, her practiced eyes scanning the rows for forgotten belongings, stray trash, or anything out of place. She had been flying this route for 6 years, and the routine was as familiar as breathing. Row by row, she moved through the dimly lit cabin, occasionally stopping to retrieve a magazine or straighten a seat back. Most passengers had already deplaned, their footsteps echoing down the jet bridge in an eager shuffle toward baggage claim or waiting cars. Sarah reached row 14 and paused. Someone was still seated in 14A, the window seat, his head tilted against the plastic interior wall, apparently asleep. This was not unusual. Red-eye flights always had a few deep sleepers who needed gentle rousing, people so exhausted they slept through the landing announcement, the touchdown, the taxi to the gate, and even the mass exodus of their fellow passengers. She approached with the professional courtesy she had perfected over thousands of flights. Her hand reached out to touch the passenger's shoulder, and she began her standard line about having arrived in New York. But the words died in her throat. The man's skin was cold beneath her fingers, impossibly cold, with a waxy quality that sent an immediate chill down her spine. His lips had a faint blue tinge, and his eyes, slightly open, stared at nothing with the unmistakable vacancy of death. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She pressed the call button for the cockpit, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system, and within minutes, the aircraft became a crime scene. Captain Morrison sealed the cabin, and Port Authority police officers arrived before most passengers had even collected their luggage. The deceased man sat peacefully in 14A, still buckled in, as if he had simply decided to take a very long nap during a very short flight. Detective Marcus Webb of the Port Authority Police Department arrived at Gate C-23 at 12:30 a.m., his coffee barely touched and already cooling in his hand. At 43, Webb had seen his share of airport incidents, from drug smugglers to human trafficking to the occasional medical emergency that turned fatal. But something about this call felt different. The dispatcher had been unusually tense, her words careful and measured in a way that suggested she was reading from notes someone had handed her. The scene inside the aircraft was controlled chaos. Forensic technicians photographed every angle of the deceased passenger, while the medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Okafor, conducted her preliminary assessment. Webb stood in the aisle, studying the man in 14A with the intensity that had made him one of the department's most reliable investigators. The deceased appeared to be in his mid-50s, with graying hair cut in a style that seemed oddly dated, something from decades past. He wore a brown leather jacket over a white dress shirt and dark slacks, clothes that looked worn but well-maintained. His shoes were leather Oxfords, polished to a shine that caught the cabin lights. On his lap sat a leather briefcase, old-fashioned and heavy, secured with brass clasps that had developed a patina of age. Dr. Okafor looked up from her examination, her expression troubled. She was a woman who prided herself on clinical detachment, but Webb could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Time of death is difficult to establish," she said quietly. "Body temperature suggests he's been dead for several hours, possibly longer. Rigor mortis is present but not fully developed. There's lividity consistent with seated positioning. But Marcus, there's something very wrong here. Webb waited, knowing better than to rush her. His internal temperature is reading lower than it should, even accounting for the time elapsed. And there's something else. His tissue decomposition is inconsistent. Some areas show signs of prolonged exposure to elements, while others appear almost preserved. I've never seen anything quite like it. Webb turned to Sarah Chen, who sat in the galley area wrapped in a blanket despite the cabin's warmth, giving her statement to Officer Ramirez. "Tell me about the flight," Webb said, his voice gentle but firm. Sarah looked up, her face still pale. "It was completely normal. We boarded 147 passengers in Chicago. Standard procedure, no delays, no incidents. We pushed back at 8:35 p.m. Central Time, right on schedule. The flight was smooth, barely any turbulence. I did 3 beverage services, collected trash twice. Nothing unusual happened." "Did you notice this passenger during the flight?" Webb gestured toward 14A. Sarah frowned, clearly trying to recall. "I don't remember him specifically, but that's not unusual on a full flight. I serve so many people, and if he wasn't requesting anything or causing any issues, he would have just blended in with everyone else." "Did anyone sit next to him? In 14B or 14C?" 14B and 14C were empty. I remember that because it's unusual for a Tuesday night flight to have any empty seats at all, let alone 2 together in economy. But it happens sometimes. Webb made a note and turned to Captain Morrison, who stood near the cockpit door with her arms crossed, her usual confidence replaced by visible unease. "Captain, I need to see your passenger manifest?" Morrison handed him her tablet without a word. Webb scrolled through the list of 147 names, cross-referencing seat assignments. His finger stopped at row 14. Seats 14B and 14C were indeed listed as empty, but seat 14A showed something that made his stomach tighten. Vacant. "There's no record of anyone assigned to 14A, he said slowly. "That's impossible," Morrison replied. "We counted 147 passengers boarding, and 147 passengers were supposed to be on this flight. If someone was in 14A, they had to be on the manifest." Webb looked at the gate agent's boarding records, the ticket scan data, the passenger count sheets. Every piece of documentation confirmed the same thing. 147 passengers had boarded Flight 72 in Chicago, and 147 names were on the manifest, but none of those names corresponded to seat 14A. The dead man in the window seat should not exist. By 2 a.m., the investigation had expanded. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Reeves joined the team, her jurisdiction invoked because of the potential security breach. Airport surveillance footage was pulled and reviewed, every camera angle from Chicago O'Hare's gate area examined frame by frame. The footage showed passengers boarding Flight 72 in an orderly line, their tickets scanned, their faces captured in varying degrees of clarity. But nowhere in any frame did the man from 14A appear. The flight attendants were interviewed separately, each one struggling to recall any detail about the mysterious passenger. The second flight attendant, Michael Torres, remembered thinking that row 14 looked empty during his safety check before takeoff, but he admitted he might have been mistaken, might not have looked carefully enough. The passengers seated nearby in rows 13 and 15 were tracked down and questioned. None of them remembered seeing anyone in 14A during the flight, though several admitted they had slept for most of the journey and might simply not have noticed. Webb stood in the airport security office, watching the Chicago footage replay for the 7th time. "How does someone board a plane without appearing on any camera?" he asked aloud. Agent Reeves stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They don't, unless they were already on the plane before boarding began, which is impossible given the security sweeps, or unless they somehow bypassed every camera, which is also impossible, or unless we're missing something fundamental about what we think happened. The forensic team worked through the night, processing the aircraft inch by inch. They found the deceased man's fingerprints on the armrests of 14A, on the window shade, on the tray table. But they found no fingerprints on anything else. No trail showing how he had moved through the aircraft to reach that seat. It was as if he had materialized in row 14, fully formed, and never moved again. At 4:15 a.m., the first identification results came back. The fingerprints from the deceased passenger had been run through every available database, and they had generated a match. Webb stared at the report with growing disbelief, certain there had been an error. But the confirmation came through twice more, from different systems, all saying the same impossible thing. The fingerprints belonged to Daniel Marcus Holloway, a 47-year-old insurance adjuster from Boston who had disappeared on March 15, 1994, during a business trip to Chicago. His rental car had been found abandoned at O'Hare Airport, his wallet and identification still inside. Despite an extensive search, Holloway had never been found, and he had been declared legally dead in 2001 after 7 years of absence. The case had gone cold, filed away as a likely suicide or voluntary disappearance, another soul who had decided to walk away from his life. But the fingerprints did not lie. The dead man in seat 14A was Daniel Holloway, and Daniel Holloway had been missing for 30 years. Webb called in the records from 1994, dusty files that had been digitized but rarely accessed. The investigation into Holloway's disappearance had been thorough but ultimately fruitless. He had been in Chicago for a 3-day business conference, staying at the Palmer House Hotel. On the final night, March 15th, he had attended a dinner with colleagues, left the restaurant at approximately 9:30 p.m., and never been seen again. His flight back to Boston the next morning had departed without him. His wife, Margaret Holloway, had reported him missing when he failed to return home. The photograph from his missing person file showed a man who looked remarkably similar to the deceased passenger, though 30 years younger. The same facial structure, the same thin nose, the same slight cleft in the chin. But the man in 14A had aged, or appeared to have aged, by approximately 30 years. The leather jacket he wore matched the description of the jacket Holloway had been wearing the night he disappeared, down to the small tear in the left sleeve that his wife had mentioned in her statement. Dr. Okafor conducted a more thorough examination as dawn broke over LaGuardia. The body had been transported to the medical examiner's office, and under proper lighting and with full equipment, she could provide a more detailed assessment. Webb stood in the observation room, watching through the glass as she worked. The clothing fibers are consistent with materials and manufacturing techniques from the early 1990s, she reported. The jacket, the shirt, even the shoes, they all show wear patterns and aging consistent with garments that are approximately 30 years old. But here's what doesn't make sense. The body itself shows signs of death occurring relatively recently, within the last 24 to 48 hours. Yet there are also indicators of long-term exposure to cold, almost like the body was preserved through freezing and then thawed. Could he have been frozen for 30 years and then thawed? Webb asked. The cellular degradation doesn't support that. If someone had been frozen solid for 3 decades and then thawed, we would see extensive ice crystal damage to the tissues, rupture of cell walls, massive necrosis. This body doesn't show those signs. It's almost as if he died recently but somehow also spent 30 years in suspension. I know how impossible that sounds. Webb turned to Agent Reeves. We need to find Margaret Holloway. Margaret Holloway wasn't difficult to locate. She still lived in Boston, in the same house she had shared with Daniel before his disappearance. She was now 76 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had never remarried. When Webb and Reeves arrived at her door at 10 a.m., she answered with the kind of wariness that came from decades of unwanted visitors bringing bad news or false hope. Her living room was a museum of a life interrupted. Photographs of Daniel adorned the mantel, frozen in time from 1994 and earlier. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, birthday celebrations. Margaret sat on her sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, as Webb explained what they had found. She listened without interruption, her face showing no emotion until he finished. Then she was silent for a long moment before speaking. "You're telling me you found Daniel's body on an airplane 30 years after he disappeared, and he looks like he aged those 30 years, but he only died recently." "That's what the evidence suggests, Mrs. Holloway. I know how impossible it sounds." Margaret stood and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a small wooden box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her in handwriting that Webb recognized from Holloway's 1994 documents. "I've received letters from Daniel," she said quietly. "Not many, maybe one every few years. They started about 5 years after he disappeared. They never have a return address, and the postmarks are always different. Different cities, different states, even different countries sometimes." She handed the most recent letter to Webb. It was dated March 1st, 2024, postmarked from Chicago. The handwriting was shaky but recognizable, and the message was brief. "Margaret, I'm coming home. Flight 72, March 19th. I'm sorry for everything. I've been lost, but I've found my way back. Wait for me. Daniel." March 19th was the date Flight 72 had landed at LaGuardia. Webb felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting, but not yet fitting together. "Did you go to the airport?" he asked. Margaret nodded. "I drove to LaGuardia on March 19th. I waited at the arrivals area for hours. I watched every passenger from Flight 72 come through, and Daniel wasn't among them. I thought maybe it was another false hope, another cruel trick of my imagination. I went home thinking I had been foolish to believe." "You never reported these letters to the police?" "I did, initially, when the first one arrived in 1999. The police said it was probably a hoax, someone who had read about Daniel's disappearance. They said the handwriting was similar but couldn't be definitively confirmed as his. After a while, I stopped reporting them. I just kept them, hoping that someday they would lead to answers." Webb examined the letters more carefully. They were strange, rambling in places, speaking of being lost in darkness, of trying to find the right path home, of time moving differently than it should. Some letters mentioned places Holloway had never been, at least according to his wife. Others referenced events he could not have witnessed. Reading them was like reading the journal of someone unstuck in time, someone experiencing reality in a fractured, non-linear way. Agent Reeves conducted a thorough background check on everyone connected to Daniel Holloway in 1994. His colleagues from the insurance company, most now retired or deceased. His friends, scattered across the country. His family, a brother who had died in 2010, and an elderly mother in a nursing home who no longer remembered her own name, let alone her missing son. None of them had heard from Holloway since his disappearance. None of them had received mysterious letters or strange phone calls. Only Margaret had maintained this tenuous connection across 3 decades. The briefcase from seat 14A yielded its secrets slowly. It contained documents, all dated from March 1994. Insurance reports, conference materials, a travel itinerary. There was also a wallet with Holloway's identification, credit cards that had been canceled decades ago, and $43 in cash, the bills showing the design used in 1994. Tucked into a side pocket was a photograph of Margaret, young and smiling, probably taken in the late 1980s. On the back, written in Holloway's handwriting, was a simple message: "My way home." But the briefcase also contained items that should not have been there. A boarding pass for Flight 72, dated March 19, 2024, with no seat assignment. A smartphone, an older model but far more advanced than anything that existed in 1994, completely dead and unable to be powered on. And a notebook filled with handwritten entries that appeared to be dates and locations, a log of some kind, spanning from 1994 to 2024. Webb sat in his office at 2:08 a.m., the day after discovering the body now blending into the next, and read through the notebook entries. They were cryptic, often consisting of just a date, a location, and a brief note. March 20th, 1994, Chicago O'Hare arrived but wrong time. April 6th, 1994, Denver saw Margaret but she couldn't see me. June 12th, 1994, Boston tried to go home but the house was empty. The entries continued year after year, documenting a bizarre journey through time and space. Some entries were more detailed. August 15th, 2003, Los Angeles. Finally understand I'm not where I should be. November 3rd, 2008, New York. Saw her today. At the grocery store, she looks older, but I haven't aged enough. January 17th, 2015, Chicago. Keep coming back here. It's the center, the place where everything began. The most recent entry was dated March 18th, 2024. Tomorrow I take Flight 72. If I've calculated correctly, I'll arrive when and where I'm supposed to. If not, this has all been for nothing. The forensic analysis of the aircraft continued, with teams searching for any explanation of how Holloway could have boarded without being seen. They examined every access point, every service door, every panel and hatch. They reviewed maintenance records, looking for any opportunity when someone could have hidden aboard before passengers boarded. They found nothing. The aircraft had been swept and cleared according to protocol. The doors had been monitored continuously from the moment the jetway was attached until the last passenger boarded. There was no window of opportunity, no gap in security, no moment when a stowaway could have slipped aboard undetected. The Chicago investigation proved equally baffling. Security footage from O'Hare showed Flight 72 from the moment it arrived as an incoming flight, through its cleaning and restocking, through boarding, and finally through departure. At no point did Daniel Holloway appear in any frame. The gate agents who had processed boarding were interviewed. They remembered the flight clearly because it had been unusually efficient, with no delays or problems. None of them recalled anyone matching Holloway's description. Dr. Okafor presented her final autopsy report on March 21st, and it raised more questions than it answered. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but the circumstances were anything but ordinary. Holloway's body showed signs of extreme physiological stress, as if his system had been subjected to forces that human biology was not designed to withstand. There were cellular abnormalities she could not explain, molecular structures that seemed out of place, and most disturbing of all, evidence that his body had experienced time dilation effects similar to what theoretical physics predicted might occur near extreme gravitational fields or during faster-than-light travel. "I'm putting that in my report," she told Webb, "because it's what the evidence shows, even though I know how insane it sounds. His body aged 30 years, but not in any normal biological process. It's like he was subjected to accelerated entropy in specific tissues, while others remained relatively unchanged. And there are trace elements in his bloodstream that shouldn't be there, isotopes that don't occur naturally on Earth." Webb contacted Dr. Raymond Chen, a theoretical physicist at Columbia University, showing him the autopsy findings and the timeline of events. Dr. Chen spent 2 days reviewing the materials before agreeing to meet. They sat in his cluttered office, surrounded by equations scrawled on whiteboards and stacks of research papers. "What you're describing," Dr. Chen said carefully, "sounds like a closed, time-like curve, a theoretical pathway through space-time that would allow someone to travel to their own past or future. In general relativity, these are mathematically possible under certain extreme conditions, though we've never observed one in nature and don't believe they actually exist." "But if they did exist," Webb pressed, "if they did, someone caught in such a curve might experience time in a non-linear fashion. They might age while the rest of the universe ages differently. They might appear and disappear at different points in space-time, always trying to complete the curve and return to their starting point. The problem is, creating such a curve would require exotic matter with negative energy density, or proximity to a rotating black hole, or other conditions that simply don't exist in places like Chicago O'Hare Airport. Unless something happened there in 1994, Webb suggested, something that created these conditions temporarily. Dr. Chen looked skeptical but intrigued. What kind of something? Webb had been researching that question. He pulled up records from March 1994, looking for anything unusual that had occurred at O'Hare. Weather anomalies, equipment malfunctions, construction projects, anything that might provide a clue. And he found something interesting. On the night of March 15, 1994, the same night Holloway disappeared, O'Hare Airport had experienced a complete power failure in Terminal 3. The terminal Holloway had been scheduled to depart from the next morning. The blackout lasted 17 minutes, from 9:47 p.m. to 10:04 p.m., and was never adequately explained. Official reports attributed it to an electrical surge, but maintenance logs showed no evidence of damaged equipment or blown circuits. During those 17 minutes, several passengers and airport employees reported seeing strange lights in the terminal, hearing unusual sounds described as a low humming or vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Webb dug deeper and found incident reports filed by security officers on duty that night. They described feeling disoriented during the blackout, experiencing brief periods where they could not account for their movements or remember what they had been doing. One officer wrote in his report that he had seen a man walking toward Gate K7 during the blackout. A man who seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, but when power was restored, there was no one there. Gate K7 had been scheduled for a Boston-bound flight the morning of March 16, 1994, the flight Daniel Holloway was supposed to take. Webb felt the pieces beginning to align, though the picture they formed defied everything he thought he knew about reality. Agent Reeves pursued a different line of investigation. She obtained passenger manifests for every flight that had departed O'Hare on March 16, 1994, looking for any anomalies or unusual incidents. Most flights had been delayed due to the previous night's power failure and the subsequent system checks, but all had eventually departed without major problems. Except for one. Flight 227 to Boston had reported a passenger who had boarded but could not be found in their seat after takeoff. The crew conducted a search of the entire aircraft, including lavatories and storage compartments, but found no one. The passenger had been listed on the manifest, had a valid ticket, and had scanned their boarding pass at the gate, but they had apparently vanished somewhere between the jetway and their seat. The incident was logged and reported to the FAA, but no explanation was ever found, and the passenger was never identified because the boarding records were corrupted during the power failure. Reeves showed this to Webb. What if Holloway did board that flight in 1994? What if whatever happened during the power failure caused him to slip out of normal time, and he's been trying to complete that journey ever since? Trying to get to Boston, Webb said slowly. Trying to go home. But he keeps appearing in the wrong times. He boards flights, but they land in the wrong year, or he arrives at the wrong place, or he can't quite synchronize with the reality where he belongs. Webb returned to the notebook from Holloway's briefcase, reading it again with this new understanding. The entries tracked a man desperately trying to navigate a universe that had become unstuck around him. He would appear in different cities, different years, always slightly out of phase with the world he remembered. He aged slowly, much slower than he should have, while the world around him raced forward. He wrote letters to Margaret, trying to maintain some connection to his former life, but never able to fully return to it. The entry from 2015 stood out. Keep coming back here. It's the center, the place where everything began. Chicago was the epicenter of whatever had happened to him. the point where his timeline had fractured. And he had been returning there repeatedly, trying to find the right combination of factors that would allow him to complete his journey home. Webb contacted Margaret Holloway again, this time asking specifically about the letters. Did Daniel ever mention anything about time in his letters? About feeling like he was moving through years incorrectly? Margaret pulled out the box of letters and sorted through them. Yes, actually. In this one, from 2007, he wrote, "The days pass normally for me, but when I look at newspapers, years have gone by. I don't understand how this is possible. I'm trapped in moments that don't connect properly to each other." And in this one, from 2012, "I've seen you age, Margaret. I've watched from a distance as years passed for you while only months passed for me. It's agony knowing I can't reach you, can't hold you, can't explain." Did he ever mention trying to get on flights? Constantly. He wrote about airports, about boarding planes, about trying to get to Boston. But something always went wrong. He would end up in the wrong city, or the wrong year, or he would board a flight and find himself still at the airport after it landed, as if he had never left. It's all there in the letters, a chronicle of someone trying and failing to come home. Webb assembled the full timeline, pulling together every piece of evidence. March 15, 1994, Daniel Holloway experienced some kind of temporal anomaly during the power failure at O'Hare. He became unstuck in time, existing in a state where he could move between different moments, but could not properly anchor himself to any of them. For 30 years, he wandered through a fractured timeline, appearing and disappearing, aging slowly while the world aged normally, always trying to complete the journey home that had been interrupted that night in Chicago. The letters to Margaret were his lifeline, his way of maintaining his identity and his purpose. He kept trying different flights, different dates, different approaches, hoping to find the correct path that would let him synchronize with his original timeline and arrive in Boston as he was supposed to in 1994. March 19, 2024, represented his final attempt. Flight 72, a red-eye from Chicago to New York, scheduled to land at LaGuardia, the same airport where Margaret would have connected if she had been traveling to Boston from many locations. Holloway had believed, based on his calculations documented in the notebook, that this flight, on this date, would finally bring him to the right time and place. And in a way, it had. He had successfully boarded the flight, though no one could see him do it. He had traveled with it from Chicago to New York. He had aged those final years, his body catching up to the time he should have lived. And he had died somewhere over Pennsylvania, his heart finally giving out after 3 decades of impossible strain. He had arrived at the airport where Margaret waited, though he arrived as a corpse in a seat that should have been empty. Webb stood in the observation room of the medical examiner's office, looking at Daniel Holloway's body, now resting peacefully on a steel table. 30 years of wandering, 30 years of trying to get home, and he had come so close. Margaret had been at the airport, waiting for him, just meters away beyond security barriers, and he had been unable to reach her. Margaret came to identify the body formally, though the fingerprints and dental records had already confirmed his identity beyond any doubt. She stood at the window, looking at the husband she had lost 3 decades ago, tears streaming silently down her face. "Can I see him?" she asked. They allowed her into the examination room, and she approached the table slowly. Her hand reached out to touch his face, the same face she had kissed goodbye on the morning of March 15, 1994, now aged and still, but unmistakably him. She noticed details that only a wife would see. The small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the slight crookedness of his nose that he had always been self-conscious about, the wedding ring still on his finger after all these years. "I waited for you," she whispered. "I never stopped waiting." In his jacket pocket, the forensic team had found one final letter, unsealed, ready to be mailed but never sent. Webb had read it, but had not shown it to Margaret until now. He handed it to her, and she read it there, standing beside her husband's body. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've failed again, or perhaps I've succeeded in a way I didn't anticipate. I don't know anymore. I've been trying to come home for so long that I've almost forgotten what home feels like. But I never forgot you. Through all the lost years, all the confused moments, all the times I appeared in places and times where I didn't belong, your face was always clear in my mind. You were my compass, my anchor, my reason to keep trying. I'm on Flight 72 now, writing this as we prepare to depart Chicago. I think this is it. I think I've finally figured out the pattern, the combination of factors that will let me arrive when and where I'm supposed to be. If I'm right, I'll see you at the airport in a few hours, and we can finally have the life that was stolen from us. If I'm wrong, if this letter reaches you, then know that I never stopped loving you, never stopped trying, and that somewhere in the fractured moments I've been wandering through, my heart always knew where home was. Yours forever, Daniel." The investigation concluded with more questions than answers. The official report stated that Daniel Holloway had died of natural causes aboard Flight 72, though the circumstances of his boarding remained unexplained due to what was termed security system anomalies. The FAA and FBI jointly recommended enhanced screening procedures and surveillance coverage, though both agencies privately acknowledged that no amount of security could have prevented whatever had actually occurred. Dr. Chen published a theoretical paper on closed time-like curves and temporal displacement, using the Holloway case as an anonymous thought experiment. The paper generated significant debate in physics circles, with some calling it brilliant speculation and others dismissing it as science fiction. No consensus was reached, but the equations were sound, and they predicted exactly the kind of phenomena that seemed to have affected Holloway. Dr. Okafor kept tissue samples from the autopsy, storing them in a secure facility, with the notation that they represented an unsolved medical mystery worthy of future research. She wrote in her private journal that in 30 years of examining bodies, she had never encountered anything that challenged her understanding of biology and physics as profoundly as Daniel Holloway. Margaret Holloway buried her husband in a small cemetery in Boston, in a plot beside the space she had reserved for herself. The gravestone bore both dates, 1947-1994 and 1947-2024, an acknowledgement that Daniel had somehow lived and died in both years. The funeral was small, attended by Margaret, a few distant relatives who remembered Daniel from before his disappearance, and Detective Webb, who felt an obligation to see the case through to its conclusion. After the funeral, Margaret invited Webb back to her house. They sat in the living room surrounded by the photographs of a life interrupted, drinking tea and talking about Daniel. "Do you believe in fate, Detective?" Margaret asked. Webb considered the question. "I believe in evidence and logic, but I also know that sometimes the evidence points to things that logic says should be impossible." Daniel believed he was meant to come home. All those years, all that suffering, and he never gave up believing he would find his way back to me. And he did, in the end. Not the way either of us hoped, but he made it back. I'm sorry it ended this way. I'm sorry too, but I'm also grateful. I spent 30 years not knowing if he was alive or dead, if he had left willingly or been taken, if he had forgotten me or still loved me. Now I know. He loved me enough to spend 3 decades trying to cross an impossible distance to reach me. How many people can say that about their spouse? Webb left Margaret's house as the sun was setting, the spring air carrying the scent of flowers beginning to bloom. He drove back to New York, to his office, to the stacks of paperwork that would document the strangest case of his career. But his mind kept returning to the image of Daniel Holloway, sitting peacefully in seat 14A, finally at rest after a 3-decade journey through fractured time. In the weeks that followed, Webb received occasional updates on related matters. The smartphone from Holloway's briefcase was finally powered on by FBI technicians, revealing a device that contained photographs spanning 30 years, all of Margaret, taken from a distance. Images of her at grocery stores, at parks, walking to her car, living her life while Daniel watched from the shadows of his temporal displacement, unable to reach her, but unable to stay away. The boarding pass from Flight 72 was analyzed by experts who confirmed it was genuine, but could not explain how it had been issued. The airline had no record of selling a ticket for that flight to anyone named Daniel Holloway, or matching his description. The barcode on the pass was valid, but corresponded to a reservation that, according to the computer system, had never existed. Agent Reeves continued to investigate the 1994 power failure at O'Hare, tracking down retired employees who had been present that night. Most remembered nothing unusual beyond the inconvenience of the blackout, but one former security supervisor recalled something that had never made it into the official reports. He remembered seeing a passenger, a man in a brown leather jacket, standing in Terminal 3 during the blackout, illuminated by emergency lighting. The man had looked confused, disoriented, and when the supervisor approached to offer assistance, the man had said something strange. "What year is it?" The supervisor had assumed the passenger was joking, or perhaps intoxicated, and in the confusion of the power restoration, he had forgotten about the encounter. But 30 years later, looking at photographs of Daniel Holloway, he was certain it was the same man. Dr. Chen continued his research into temporal mechanics, using grant money to build mathematical models of the conditions that might create a closed time-like curve. His simulations suggested that certain combinations of electromagnetic fields, gravitational fluctuations, and quantum entanglement could theoretically create temporary rifts in space-time. Whether such conditions had actually existed at O'Hare in 1994 remained speculation, but the mathematics supported the possibility. Webb kept a file on the case in his home office, separate from the official records. He collected newspaper clippings about other unexplained disappearances at airports, wondering if Holloway had been unique or if there were others lost in temporal displacement, wandering through fractured timelines trying to find their way home. The numbers suggested that every year, hundreds of people vanished without a trace from airports around the world, most explained by voluntary disappearances, foul play, or tragic accidents. But a small percentage remained truly mysterious, cases where people seemed to simply cease to exist between one moment and the next. He thought about the notebook entries, about Holloway's repeated attempts to board flights, to navigate the temporal maze he had become trapped in. How many times had he tried and failed? How many flights had he attempted to board, only to find himself still on the ground when they landed, or arriving in the wrong year, or unable to make himself visible to the people around him? The final entry in the notebook haunted Webb. "Tomorrow I take Flight 72. If I've calculated correctly, I'll arrive when and where I'm supposed to. If not, this has all been for nothing." Holloway had known it was his last chance, that his body could not endure much more of the strain, that the decades of displacement had taken their toll. He had risked everything on one final journey, and he had both succeeded and failed. He had arrived, but not in time to live. Margaret continued to receive letters. Webb learned this from a phone call 6 months after the funeral. "They're still coming," she told him. "Once every few weeks, from different cities, different countries. The handwriting is Daniel's." "That's impossible," Webb said. "We buried him 6 months ago." "I know, but the letters are real. They arrive, postmarked from various locations, and they're his handwriting. Most of them are dated from years ago, 2019, 2021, 2023. I think they're letters he wrote while he was displaced, and they're only now finding their way to me, somehow catching up through the same temporal fractures he was traveling through." Webb asked her to save the letters, to document when they arrived and what they said. They formed a strange, supplemental timeline, messages from a ghost reaching across the broken barriers of time. Some were cheerful, expressing hope that he would soon find his way home. Others were desperate, filled with fear that he would never escape. All of them ended the same way. "I love you. I'm trying to come home." The last letter Margaret received arrived on the first anniversary of Daniel's death. It was postmarked from Chicago, dated March 19, 2024, the day of his final flight. The envelope was heavier than usual, containing not just a letter, but a small object. Margaret opened it carefully and found Daniel's wedding ring, the same ring he had been wearing when he died, which had been buried with him. The impossibility of this did not escape Webb's notice when Margaret called to report it. He drove to Boston to see the ring himself, to confirm that it was real. He checked the cemetery records, wondering if the grave had been disturbed, but the groundskeeper assured him it had not been touched. The grave remained sealed, undisturbed, exactly as it had been since the burial. "How is this possible?" Margaret asked, holding the ring that should have been 6 feet underground on her husband's finger. Webb had no answer. The ring was real. The letter was real. The postmark was real. But none of it should have been possible. Unless time, as it related to Daniel Holloway, continued to be fractured even after his death, with objects and messages slipping through temporal cracks, finding their way to where they were always meant to be. The letter accompanying the ring was brief. "Margaret, I hope you never have to read this. I hope I'm with you now, alive, and we're laughing about how worried I was. But if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it, not the way I wanted to. Keep this ring. It's the only thing I managed to hold on to through all the years of displacement, and I want you to have it. Not as a memorial, but as a promise. Somewhere, in some timeline, we're together. Somewhere we got our happy ending. I believe that. I have to believe that. All my love, Daniel." Webb closed the file on the case officially, but he never stopped thinking about it. The mystery of Flight 72's forgotten passenger became a legend in airport security circles, whispered about in training sessions and late-night shift changes. Some versions of the story became exaggerated, adding supernatural elements or conspiracy theories. But those who had been directly involved, who had seen the evidence and lived through the investigation, knew the truth was stranger than any fiction. Years later, Webb retired from the Port Authority and took a position teaching criminal investigation at John Jay College. He used the Holloway case as a teaching example, carefully omitting identifying details to illustrate how investigations sometimes led to questions that had no answers, how evidence could point to conclusions that defied understanding, and how the universe sometimes presented mysteries that were meant to remain unsolved. Margaret Holloway lived another 5 years, remaining in the house she had shared with Daniel, surrounded by his letters and photographs. She never remarried, never moved on in any conventional sense. She told friends that she was waiting, that somewhere in the fractured timelines Daniel had wandered through, there was a version of events where he had successfully made it home, and she wanted to be there when that version intersected with her reality. She died peacefully in her sleep on March 15, 2029, exactly 35 years after Daniel's disappearance. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidental, and Webb, attending her funeral, wondered if she had simply decided it was time to go find him, to navigate whatever lay beyond death in search of the reunion that had been denied them in life. The house was sold, and the new owners found boxes of letters in the attic, hundreds of them, documenting a 3-decade conversation between a woman and a ghost. They donated them to the Boston Public Library, where they were archived as a unique historical document of love and loss. Researchers occasionally reviewed them, fascinated by the detailed account of temporal displacement, though most dismissed them as an elaborate fiction. Dr. Okafor kept the tissue samples until her own retirement, then transferred them to a research facility specializing in unexplained medical phenomena. The samples remained there, frozen in liquid nitrogen, awaiting the day when science might advance enough to explain the cellular anomalies that had defied every test and analysis. Agent Reeves moved on to other cases, other mysteries, but she kept the photograph from Holloway's briefcase, the one of Margaret with the message, "My way home," on the back. It sat on her desk as a reminder that some investigations measured success not in solved crimes, but in bearing witness to human stories that transcended normal understanding. The aircraft that had been Flight 72 continued to fly for several more years before being retired and sold for parts. Seat 14A was removed during refurbishment and ended up in an aviation museum, labeled as coming from a historic aircraft, but with no mention of the passenger who had died there. Museum visitors occasionally sat in it, taking photographs, unaware that they were occupying the place where a man had completed a 30-year journey through fractured time. The mystery remained officially unsolved, filed away in databases and archives, a strange footnote in aviation history. But for those who had been touched by it, who had known Daniel Holloway through his letters and his journey, who had witnessed Margaret's unwavering love across impossible years, the case was about something deeper than mystery. It was about the lengths people would go to return home, the power of love to transcend the boundaries of normal reality, and the possibility that the universe was stranger and more malleable than anyone wanted to believe. Webb thought about it on the anniversary of finding Holloway's body, standing in his office late at night with the file open before him. All the evidence, all the impossible details, all the unanswered questions. He had spent his career finding truth in facts, building cases on evidence, trusting that logic and reason could solve any mystery. The Holloway case had taught him that some truths existed beyond the reach of conventional investigation, that reality sometimes bent in ways that defied explanation. He closed the file for the last time, adding one final note to the record. Daniel Holloway spent 30 years trying to complete a journey home that should have taken 3 hours. He failed and succeeded simultaneously, arriving at his destination, but not in time to live the life he had fought so hard to reclaim. His story reminds us that the universe contains mysteries we are not equipped to solve, but also that love and determination can transcend even the barriers of time itself. Case closed, but never truly resolved. The forgotten passenger of Flight 72 remained a ghost in the machine of aviation security, a reminder that not everything could be explained or prevented, that sometimes reality fractured in ways that allowed the impossible to occur. And somewhere in the temporal echoes of that fractured reality, perhaps Daniel Holloway finally found his way home, arriving in a moment where Margaret was waiting, young and smiling, ready to begin the life that had been stolen from them on a dark night in Chicago, when time itself broke apart and scattered a man across 3 decades of desperate searching. Webb's investigation had uncovered other anomalies that he had not included in the official report, details that seemed too fantastic to document formally, but too significant to ignore. In reviewing airport security footage from various locations over the years, he discovered other instances of temporal irregularities. Brief moments where cameras malfunctioned inexplicably, gaps in recordings that corresponded to passenger complaints about feeling disoriented or experiencing missing time. Webb compiled these reports, creating a database of temporal anomalies at airports worldwide. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Certain locations seemed more prone to these incidents, and those locations often had histories of unexplained power failures, electromagnetic disturbances, or unusual geological features. Chicago O'Hare was at the center of this pattern, with more reported incidents than any other location, but it was not alone. Dr. Chen's research expanded to include these additional cases, building a comprehensive model of how temporal displacement might occur in specific locations under specific conditions. His theory suggested that airports, with their unique combination of electromagnetic fields from communication systems, gravitational fluctuations from massive structures and aircraft, and the psychological state of passengers in transition between locations, might create temporary conditions where space-time became malleable. The human consciousness, Chen theorized, might play a role in stabilizing or destabilizing these temporal pockets. People in states of transition, anxious about travel, disconnected from their normal routines, might be more susceptible to temporal displacement. Daniel Holloway, stressed about his business trip, exhausted from the conference, mentally focused on getting home to Margaret, might have been in exactly the psychological state that made him vulnerable when the power failure created a temporal rift. Chen's paper, eventually published in a fringe physics journal after being rejected by mainstream publications, proposed that consciousness and space-time were more intimately connected than classical physics acknowledged. The act of observation, of conscious awareness of one's location in space and time, helped anchor an individual to their proper timeline. When that awareness was disrupted through stress, exhaustion, electromagnetic interference, or trauma, the anchoring could fail, and temporal displacement could occur. The implications were profound and disturbing. If Chen was correct, then every airport in the world was potentially a site where travelers might become unstuck in time, where the act of moving between locations could accidentally become the act of moving between temporal states. The phenomenon was rare, requiring precise combinations of conditions, but it was possible, and it had happened to Daniel Holloway with catastrophic consequences. Webb shared Chen's research with other law enforcement agencies, hoping to create awareness and perhaps develop protocols for identifying and assisting temporal displacement victims. The response was skeptical at best, hostile at worst. Most agencies refused to acknowledge the possibility, citing lack of evidence and the absurdity of the claims. A few took the information seriously, quietly adding it to their training materials as a theoretical scenario, a just-in-case addendum to their standard missing persons procedures. The FAA and TSA were similarly reluctant to engage with the research. Acknowledging that airports might be sites of temporal anomalies would create public panic, might discourage travel, might open the agencies to liability for failing to protect passengers from an impossible-to-predict phenomenon. Better to classify such incidents as medical emergencies, psychological episodes, or administrative errors than to confront the possibility that reality itself was unstable in the places where millions of people traveled every day. But privately, some officials took the matter seriously. A small working group was formed, operating without official sanction or public acknowledgement, tasked with monitoring airports for signs of temporal anomalies. They tracked power failures, electromagnetic disturbances, passenger complaints about lost time or disorientation, and any incidents that might indicate a temporal displacement event was occurring or had occurred. The working group discovered that such events, while rare, were not as uncommon as anyone wanted to believe. Every year, several incidents occurred that fit the profile of temporal displacement. Most were minor, brief dislocations that resolved themselves within hours and left the affected individuals confused but unharmed. Others were more severe, leading to missing persons cases that were never solved, people who had stepped out of time and never found their way back. Daniel Holloway represented the most extreme case they had encountered, a displacement that had lasted 30 years and ended in death. But he was not alone in his suffering. The working group identified at least a dozen other long-term displacement cases, people who had vanished from airports in various years and were occasionally glimpsed in the decades that followed, always looking confused, always wearing clothes from the era of their disappearance, always trying desperately to complete journeys that had been interrupted by forces beyond their understanding. One case from 1987 involved a woman named Catherine Price, who had disappeared from Miami International Airport while waiting for a connecting flight to Jamaica. She had been seen periodically over the following 23 years, always at airports, always asking about flights to Jamaica, always wearing the same floral dress she had worn the day she vanished. Witnesses described her as seeming disoriented, unable to understand that decades had passed, insisting that she needed to reach Jamaica for her daughter's wedding, even though her daughter had married in 1987 and was now middle-aged with children of her own. Catherine was last seen in 2010 at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Her family received a letter postmarked from Kingston, Jamaica, dated 1987, but arriving in 2010, saying she had finally made it to the wedding. The handwriting was confirmed as hers, but she had never arrived in Jamaica in 1987, and she had not been seen there in 2010. Another case, from 2001, involved a man named Robert Sung, who disappeared from Los Angeles International Airport. He was spotted occasionally over the next decade, always trying to board flights to South Korea. Sung's son received phone calls over the years from his father, always confused about why his son sounded so old. The last call came in 2018, 17 years after Sung's disappearance. His body was found 3 days later in a bathroom at LAX, dead from cardiac arrest, wearing the same clothes from 2001. These cases formed a pattern, a tragic roster of people caught between moments, trying desperately to complete interrupted journeys, aging slowly while the world aged normally, eventually dying from the strain of existing in temporal displacement. The working group documented each case carefully, building a profile of temporal displacement syndrome, identifying risk factors and potential interventions. But interventions were theoretical at best. How did you rescue someone who was unstuck in time? How did you guide them back to their proper moment when the conditions that had displaced them were impossible to replicate or reverse? The working group had no answers, only observations, only the growing certainty that temporal displacement was real and that victims were suffering in ways that conventional rescue operations could not address. Webb became an unofficial consultant to the working group, providing insights from his investigation of the Holloway case. He reviewed other cases, looking for patterns and connections, trying to understand the mechanism behind temporal displacement. His work led him to geologists who studied gravitational anomalies, to physicists who researched quantum entanglement, to psychologists who studied altered states of consciousness. He became an expert in a field that officially did not exist, a specialist in impossible phenomena that authorities refused to acknowledge. His office at home became a museum of the unexplained, walls covered with maps showing temporal displacement hotspots, timelines documenting when and where incidents occurred, photographs of victims who had been glimpsed between moments. He spent evenings reading letters from families of the displaced, people who had lost loved ones to temporal anomalies, and were desperate for answers, for hope, for any acknowledgement that their missing family members had not simply abandoned them, but had been taken by forces beyond anyone's control. Margaret Holloway's letters to him after Daniel's death were particularly poignant. She wrote about the strange comfort of knowing what had happened, of understanding that Daniel had not left willingly, but had been caught in something he could not escape. She wrote about the ongoing letters she received from him, messages arriving years after they were written, creating a correspondence that spanned death itself. She wrote about her decision to wait, to remain in the house they had shared, to be ready if some temporal fluctuation allowed him to arrive home as he had always intended. Her final letter to Webb, written weeks before her death, contained a request. She asked that when she died, her ashes be scattered at Chicago O'Hare, Terminal 3, near Gate K7, the place where Daniel had disappeared. She believed, with the certainty of someone who had spent 35 years loving a ghost, that some part of him remained there, trapped in the temporal rift that had swallowed him, and that by placing her remains there, she might somehow reach him, might complete the reunion that life had denied them. Webb honored her request, traveling to Chicago with her ashes and a small group of people who had been touched by the Holloway case. Dr. Chen was there, still pursuing his research into temporal mechanics. Agent Reeves attended, having never forgotten the case that had defined her early career. Dr. Okafor came, carrying the scientific reports that documented Holloway's impossible physiology. And Sarah Chen, the flight attendant who had discovered Holloway's body, was present, wanting to pay respects to a passenger she felt she should have noticed, should have helped, even though his displacement meant she never could have. They scattered Margaret's ashes in a maintenance area near Gate K7, now closed for renovations, a quiet space where travelers once hurried to catch flights, but which now stood empty and silent. As they performed the simple ceremony, the lights flickered briefly, a momentary disturbance in the electrical system that maintenance later attributed to construction work. But those present felt something else, a sensation of pressure in the air, a brief moment where time seemed to hesitate. And Webb wondered if perhaps Margaret had been right, if her consciousness was finding Daniel in the temporal spaces where he had been lost, if love could indeed transcend the barriers between moments. The investigation officially remained open in Webb's files, marked as unsolved but inactive. New cases occasionally surfaced, reports of temporal displacement that fit the pattern, and Webb reviewed each one, adding to his database, refining his understanding of the phenomenon. He published articles under a pseudonym in academic journals that specialized in fringe science, sharing his findings with researchers who might someday develop a complete theory of temporal displacement, and perhaps even a method for rescuing those caught in it. His work attracted attention from unexpected quarters. He was contacted by military researchers interested in the potential applications of controlled temporal displacement, by intelligence agencies curious about whether temporal anomalies could be weaponized or exploited, by corporate entities wondering if the phenomenon could be harnessed for time-sensitive transportation. Webb refused all such inquiries, ethical concerns outweighing any potential benefits. The people who suffered temporal displacement were victims, not research subjects, and their experiences should not be reduced to technological opportunities. The mystery of Flight 72 evolved from a specific incident into a broader recognition that reality was more fragile and strange than conventional science acknowledged. The forgotten passenger became a symbol, a reminder that human understanding of time and space remained incomplete, that the universe contained phenomena that defied explanation and perhaps always would. Daniel Holloway's 30-year journey through fractured time became a cautionary tale about the dangers lurking in the spaces between moments, but also a testament to the power of love and determination to persist even in the face of impossible circumstances. In the years following Webb's retirement from active investigation, the database of temporal displacement cases continued to grow. Other researchers took up the work, building on the foundation he had established, documenting incidents, interviewing families, analyzing patterns. A small but dedicated community of scientists, investigators, and affected families formed, supporting each other, sharing information, pushing for official recognition of temporal displacement as a real phenomenon worthy of serious study and intervention. The aviation industry slowly began to acknowledge the issue. New safety protocols were developed, presented as general emergency procedures. Flight crews received training in recognizing passengers who might be experiencing temporal disorientation. Airports installed additional monitoring equipment, electromagnetic sensors that could detect fluctuations that seemed to correlate with displacement events. These measures represented small victories, acknowledgements that something beyond conventional explanation was occurring in the world's airports. Lives were saved by protocols that had grown from Webb's investigation of Daniel Holloway's death. People experiencing the early stages of temporal displacement were identified and assisted. Not every displacement could be prevented or reversed, but awareness and intervention reduced the severity of many incidents. The forgotten passenger of Flight 72 was not forgotten after all. His story lived on in training materials, in research papers, in conversations between investigators and families. Daniel Holloway's name became synonymous with temporal displacement. Margaret Holloway's unwavering love became the emotional core of the narrative, a reminder that beyond the scientific mystery lay human experiences of loss, hope, and the refusal to give up. Webb's final act regarding the case came 15 years after Holloway's death. He published a book, carefully anonymized, telling the story of a passenger who should not have existed boarding a flight, dying in a seat that should have been empty, completing a 3-decade journey. The book became an unexpected success, resonating with universal experiences of loss, displacement, and the desperate desire to return home. The book generated renewed interest in temporal displacement research. Universities established research programs, funding studies into the relationship between consciousness and space-time. The stigma associated with investigating such phenomena diminished. Progress was slow, methodical, but it was progress nonetheless. And somewhere in the archives of the Port Authority Police Department, in a file marked closed but never truly finished, sat the evidence from Flight 72. Photographs of Daniel Holloway in Seat 14A, his letters to Margaret spanning 30 years, the notebook documenting his wandering through fractured time, the briefcase containing artifacts from 1994 and 2024 existing impossibly together. These items remained physical proof of events that defied explanation, waiting for the day when human understanding of reality might finally encompass the strange truth they represented, when the impossible might be explained, when the forgotten passenger might be remembered not as an anomaly, but as a pioneer who had inadvertently explored the hidden dimensions of space-time and paid the ultimate price for that exploration.